know you heard me on the radio. Flexing. She loved the sound of my voice, it's the best thing. Daydreaming of the jazz all day. Pick up the phone late night with Larry K. I know you heard me on the radio. Flexing. She loved the sound of my voice, it's the best thing. Daydreaming of the jazz all day. Pick up the phone late night with Larry K.
Are you fans, Night Watch listeners? Welcome to another episode of Night Watch. I'm your host, Larry K. First of all, thanks for all the support. We have surpassed 1,000 subscribers, which means a lot for this channel and the things we can do and the ways we can keep the lights on. So I greatly appreciate you guys. Remember to click that subscribe button if you like the content that we're giving you. And if you're interested in ways to sponsor the show or get involved in other ways, please contact me and don't be shy. So now, we are back with another David Anderson special who has been absolutely awesome for this show and this podcast. You guys have been telling me how much you've enjoyed the content. And when I talked to Dave about first coming on the show, I kind of said, hey, what do you want to talk about? You know, the green light is on. You tell me which direction you want to go. What topics do you want to explore? And he had a heck of a lot of ideas. And it's been an absolute pleasure exploring some of those ideas with him and discussing things. And it's been a pleasure bringing that conversation to you guys. So today, what we have is part 2 of embracing the future of college athletics. And the first episode delved more into the overall, you know, from a macro level and also as a Rutgers level picture of what the future of college athletics looks like with NIL and paying players and things. We talked about the GM position. We talked about the differences between college basketball and football as they pertain to Rutgers. But today we're going to do something a little bit different, and we're going to get in on a player, the player side, not the program side, not the school side, but a player-focused, discussion about what the future of college athletics looks like and embracing it as fans one way or another. So bringing onto the show, David Anderson. How are you, sir? How are things?
I'm doing well. Just got back from Rutgers baseball letter winner weekend where I was there supporting my dad. They honored the 1981 team for their...
Excellent.
I'm not sure if it was the Eastern 8, Atlantic 8, Atlantic 10, what is now the Atlantic 10 that people know about, but they were the 1981 champions. So it was nice for him to see a lot of his old teammates be back at the campus. But for anyone else who was dealing with flight delays in and out of Newark Saturday and yesterday, I feel for you. I was there as well. So good to spend time with the family and good to be down, or I guess up, and now in my case, I live in Charlotte, up at Rutgers to celebrate that with him and his teammates.
Sounds good. And I know that there was a recent report that Newark's can be unsafe because of a staff shortage and all these other things, a bunch of delays. So we're all keeping a close eye on that. And to those of you, which I know there's a lot of listeners on this show and a lot of Rutgers alum and in general and Big Ten alum who are frequent flyers. And so obviously we feel for you with some of these delays and things going on, and David knows firsthand. So we were talking last time we touched base on this topic, and as far as the embracing the future of college athletics. How the lay of the land is going to look like and how things can go for Rutgers, specifically with respect to the schools. But in this episode, we're going to delve into the perspective of the player. And David, the first thing I want to ask you is, you're a college athlete now, number one, right? It used to be you're going to receive a full scholarship for your education. You're going to attend the university of your choice. Education, there's probably some debate, and I bet you it changed at some point decades ago from being primarily education and academic focused with sports on the side to being primarily athletics focused with academics on the side. Nonetheless, one of the primary goals and primary responsibilities of these athletes was to obtain that degree and pursue that education while also pursuing being an elite level athlete and all that that entails. Now, with the changing landscape a step further into, financial considerations, you're quasi-professional because you're looking actively for, maybe sponsorship opportunities or balancing your financial obligations, or, how does it talk about, if you're a college athlete, from your perspective, how has it changed and changed again, in terms of obtaining your degree? Sports focus. Now you're getting money. Now you've got to get out there and earn the money, or maybe you don't. Talk about what the life of a college athlete, how does it change in this new era? And what do we need to be looking at in this new era?
Yeah, so my experience was playing, and it's an interesting topic because I was comparing my experience, with my dad and his teammates when I was talking with them and the Rutgers baseball guys this weekend, and my experience was still a little bit more similar to theirs than it was, let's say, a Rutgers athlete of the same era. Because in my school, it was not big time college athletics. But even then, a typical day. So during the football season, the typical day I had classes in the morning, and then we would try to have our classes done by around 3 o'clock because you had to get to the field in time to have afternoon practice. Now, not every team practices in that time, but it's easier to kind of herd everyone there. Like some sports, like I remember women's basketball, Vivian Stringer would have like morning practices and they would have their class in the afternoon. So every team's a little different based on gym time availability or whatever. But in short, I had my classes, and then in the gaps between my classes, I really had to get work or errands done. Like I had to get it done. And then after that, we would go to practice in the afternoon or sometimes night practice. And then if the practice was in the afternoon, we would watch film after. And if the practice was in the nighttime, we would watch film beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And then for a sport like football, you don't do as much lifting during the season. We would lift Tuesday if we were playing on Friday, and then we would lift again the day after the game. And if you were not a starter, you lifted a lot more because really, like if you basically if you played Friday and you would lift Saturday, or if you played Saturday, you'd lift Sunday. And if you were a starter and you're kind of beaten up from the game, you would more like get medical treatment, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
if you didn't play, then you had to do the full like, whatever. And for me, because it depended on the week how much I played, it was a little bit more variable, which made it a little bit more challenging. So even then, now in my case, it was a little different, as I did have a job during the season. So I already had to kind of mix that into a lot of my schedule. Whereas a lot of the really good guys, or if you were a really good student who didn't need money now because you were confident that, hey, maybe I'm not going to be a professional football player, but I'm going to be a stockbroker making 140K right out of the gate. In our era, that was like good money, right?
Right.
Now I don't know what it is, but
Mm-hmm.
so during the season there was like no time for anything. Like your
Right.
day was pretty much figured out the whole time. And if you were below a certain GPA, you had to go to mandatory study hall after all of that. So that
Gotcha.
would be like 9 to 11 or like to midnight that you had to attend to make sure that you were kind of staying on track with what you needed to do. And so really there was an incentive to be above that line, whether that GPA line's 2.5, 3, whatever it is, so that you are not forced into that. And
So
then
let
if
me
you're
ask
like in a fraternity, they had their own mandatory study hours too, because a lot of fraternities had requirements that they had to meet a certain GPA, or you're on probation in the fraternity.
you. Yep.
So like the season is just madness. So to fit in NIL, to answer your very first question, to fit in like having a podcast or selling, meeting and greeting at the local car dealership to make a few extra bucks, like there's very, very little time for that. Even for me, never mind somebody who's playing at Rutgers and they got to travel to Oregon for a game, or Washington this upcoming season, right?
So
So
yeah,
that's the long short answer to your question.
two questions spring from that whole description. Number one is, you're talking about going out and doing things for your NIL, signing autographs, promoting something, whatever. Is that really even a thing? Because it seems like they're just getting paid for play. They just call it name, image, and likeness, and there's no real requirement. Maybe it's nominal. You're going to be the face of this company or that. I don't see a lot of guys going out and doing actual obligations in exchange for money. It seems like they're just getting allotted a certain amount of money, and there's not necessarily it's not necessarily how some envisioned, like the local
Yeah,
car dealer. Sometimes it is. And it seemed like that with Rutgers early on, like Caleb McConnell and things. He actually got a deal with a car dealership to
right.
advertise or whatever it was. I don't even know if we're seeing that now. And the second question is, you talked a lot about all the obligations and how they've increased over time. You have academic obligations, you have a lot of athletic obligations. Now these guys are traveling like professional athletes cross country for their obligations. And the argument always was that I heard, college athletes are essentially professional as it is. They have all these responsibilities to the athletic program. They're worked to the bone. Therefore, they deserve to be paid. But the converse was always, and I kind of somewhat shared this, my view, just so people know, I understood the obligations were rigorous for the academic and the athletic side of a college athlete's career. However, I thought that the value of a college education was so significant. And anybody with substantial student loans and going through that right now can tell you that it's significant, that it was worth the compensation of a free college degree. And I had a friend who was a high level college athlete in a high level program or two. And, he would get money, you get, just like when you take out a student loan, sometimes there's excess money for living money to live on.
Right.
You would get housing, you would get food vouchers, you would get clothing, so there's a lot of things you did get in non-tuition expenses as part of your scholarship.
Right.
And you would obtain that degree. But I understand it was rigorous. So I was always for name, image, and likeness, which is what you're talking about, which is like, why shouldn't a guy been able, if some guy ancillary to his college degree or athletic responsibilities, other than his notoriety because of it, wanted to offer a guy a camp to run or an autograph session or a commercial, why can't he make money off of that? I was always totally for that. But in terms of paying as if they were professionals and that was their only job, I thought, well, they're getting an education. So I know that was long-winded question, but part A, are they even having to deal with these actual sponsorship deals, or are they just getting paid? And part B, is getting a college degree, and is that pursued as a student athlete? Should it have ever been a thing? Is it going to be a thing? How does it figure into this overall situation we're going into as a future from the college athlete's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly why we're having this conversation, and I talk about it frequently with a lot of people I know. I mean, from my perspective, you're right. I mean, there were so many perks, and one you didn't even mention was laundry. Like, they did our laundry every night. So you couldn't kind of just put 10 pairs of pants in there, right? But anything you could fit on your, and I probably should have grabbed it as a prop for the viewers who are watching on YouTube. Like, we had little patch, and then you had like a string with a buckle, and then you would just string as much as you could. So like you had your practice jersey, your lifting clothes, your socks would be like in the little baggie at the zipper, and then like every night. So like if you're an athlete who, like, you could literally just put your clothes on from the previous day, and they would do it every other night, and you could just wear 2 different outfits and alternate. Not to mention that if you have team swag, that you could grab an extra jacket or whatever a lot of times, right? So there was all kinds of those things that are true. Now, there's so many ways to go with this. Let me start with the most basic one, which is I agree with you about the name, image, and likeness. I always felt like if I'm playing with a guy in NCAA football 2004, and it's like Chris Baker or Brian Leonard or, Val Barnaby or whoever was there, or Ryan Neal, that like I'm getting enjoyment as a teenager playing this game, and they should be getting some of that. Like that's literally their likeness.
Yes.
In terms of, you're right that I think it varies a lot by sport, because for something like, let's say, baseball or gymnastics is a good example. They used to have 6 scholarship spots because there's really 6 people who were performing in girls gymnastics, but they might have 15 or 18 people on the team. They can also do partial scholarships. A lot of times it's common in like Division II as well. And so for those students, they're going to have some student loans. That's different than football or basketball, men's or women's, where like literally every person is on a scholarship and receiving a free education with the perks. Right. So this is where we're kind of getting into all kinds of like different like strata of how this works. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, the education, every statistic ever made says that getting a college education is more valuable than not having a college education. Now, how is that as true as it was 15 years ago, 20 years ago when we were in college? I can say as a hiring manager, no. I don't look specifically to say this person. Actually, when I was getting hired, they were looking at what school you went to. Then it became any school. And now when I'm hiring programmers for my team, like I don't even care if they went to college, because a lot of times a self-starting person is more skilled because they had to go through a more rigorous way just to get to that level, to get the certification. So what a lot of this is now is like the college athletes showing, hey, I can stay with a program and finish from beginning to end. But then you have the factor of like, should I be changing schools to get more money? Does that make it look like I'm a less reliable person or employee because I might be a transactional employee when I arrive, and then when you stop paying me what I think I'm worth, I'm going to go to another company. So as a hiring manager, like, it's kind of all over the place, and that's where I think this is kind of getting crazy because I don't know what every other employer feels. So when you flip that back to the athlete side, what should you be incentivized to do with your time? And if they're going to pay you to not do these public appearances, then your only real incentive to do them is if you're trying to build your brand for other reasons.
Right.
So
Right.
that's where it gets kind of wild, I guess, in the sense of like, you could have guys who really care about the program or girls who are just like in the film room doing this because they think that's going to be best for them and their team. It's not that they don't want to do the public appearances. They're just choosing the best use of their time is dedicating all of it to sports, right? Like the guys from the movie The Program who had with James Caan as the coach who had their tutors literally doing their homework, but they're not out there partying. They're watching film. And then the other students are, and I'm not saying that where that is or how that's true. If that's still true, I don't think it is, but it depends. Or there's the guys who are going out partying. They're at Old Queens, 4 nights a week, which may build your brand a little bit, I guess, in theory, but like it's not the same as you're literally devoting all of your time to your team. You're in the film room the entire time that you're not lifting or on a field. So I think the question I would have back is like, how much do we need to structure or organize this based on those high achievers who are like all about the team versus those who are just there to collect a paycheck, like Hassan Reddick with the Jets last year, like, hey, I'm just here for the money this year, versus those who are just using as a vehicle to play, but then they're devoting their time towards the academic side so that they can be an engineer, like after, like Miles Johnson after their school ends. Like, I think there's kind of like 3 at least distinct mindsets of a player. And how do you design a system that accommodates or works for all 3? Like that's the struggle I think that I was going to ask you about. Like, is there a one size fits all system, or as a program, do you kind of have to just decide, like Greg Schiano, like, hey, we're not going to have any free roll loaders on this team?
Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, you mentioned college degrees and their value. And I always thought that, you brought up a different wrinkle to that conversation as a hiring manager, being that you're looking at college degree didn't become as relevant anymore over time because you were looking at it more as like a work ethic, achievement, attainment thing. I always thought it was like it kind of became a minimum requirement where most jobs that used to say, well, if you have a college degree, you'll get hired with a premium on your salary. But if you don't have a college degree, you can still make it. It seemed to become like a random categorical cutoff. Like, okay, only college degree need apply. Then everybody got college degrees. So now it's not as it doesn't make you stand out as much. So now it's like reverting back to like, well, maybe it doesn't matter at all. And I think that's a grander societal conversation, but I think it does figure into our conversation about college athletics because you've got this situation now. You mentioned the 3 categories, and you have a quasi-professionalized athletics system because of streaming services, TV deals, all these other things that make college athletics a separate industry from the schools and the universities. And the only thing that really relates to the universities, if you're not one of these academic focused students, which I think there still are those people, if you're not one of them, then it's really just like pride in the university without really being integrated well with the academic side. Now you see some things going on politically and whatnot with the Big Ten schools and stuff. So I guess it can transcend athletics and academics anyway as institutions. There's research collectives, there's things like that. But I think it's an interesting, weird place we're in with these categories of students where there are people whose primary objective and motivation, it's basically just being a professional athlete. The fact that it's tied to a university or not is absolutely irrelevant. If there was a university involved or it completely separated into state minor league teams, they'd be going for the best deal they could get financially because it's a job, it's employment. That's what they're looking at. to other people who are still focused somewhat on athletics and where that could take you post graduation, regionally, professionally, they are still going to look at the university component of it. I think when you're building like a football program, you're going to need to have a delicate balance of, guys that you need because the talent is so immense that you need them and you're going to have to pay them, and guys who are, and girls who are interested in the academics, but they fit a role or a glue person or whatever player in a program. I think you'd love ideally to have both, somebody who you could compensate, who cares about compensation, but perhaps is willing to take less than the utmost market value they could obtain to stay at that university. But that's not much different from a regular professional out there in the world. There's work-life
Right.
balance. There's companies you believe in. You might stay at a certain place regardless of salary. I think where it's delicate now is, and I want to bring up an example and throw it back to you, where it's delicate now is you have young people with all this money being thrown at them. The money doesn't seem, in my estimation, a lot of times to really be, doesn't have a nexus necessarily to what the guy is going to bring to the team or what you can actually spend for a return on investment on the field. It seems like, well, whatever money we can muster up to beat every other team to get this guy, we're going to do it. You have young people who haven't been through life in that way, who may or may not have good people around them to coach them on it. And they start to just chase that financial figure kind of regardless of these other factors we've discussed with the degrees, the region, the work-life balance, the community. And I think coaches and schools have to do a good job of trying to market to these guys. But I want to bring up an example to you. You have Mo Toure, right? And this isn't, I want to know if we're going to see more of this or if this is a one-time generational thing, because these are people who came in before the system was like this and are now in the midst of this system. He seems like a kid, and I think you're going to have other kids like this who coming in, they aren't necessarily thinking I'm going to be a pro athlete and sports are my bread and butter and how I keep the lights on for the rest of my life. I'm going to pick a place to get a good education and where there's a chance I can develop athletically enough to maybe get the chance at the league. And that's how it always used to be, right?
Right.
But now that I've attained this higher ability athletically, and now schools are calling for my services, now everybody's telling me, and the common societal valuation these days is, hey, do what's best for you? And what's best for you is always the highest dollar figure. And now they're departing and going. So these categories of athletes can also be malleable when guys come in one category where I'm looking for education, but then they ascend so high with development that, well, maybe I should get the bag. And then if you add another wrinkle with Toure, and I'm not speaking for him, there was a lot of reporting that maybe there was a change of scenery too. So there was some qualitative as well as quantitative considerations for why he left, that maybe his injuries are so severe that he doesn't think there's a chance of going to the NFL and he's trying to maximize his earning potential now. I don't know if any of that's true, but assuming that speculation is at least somewhat correct, how do we manage rosters and what does it look like for a player if you're a player, because this is the player focused episode,
right? We'll talk about the other one in the next episode about how do you roster build, but
shifting back to the team. But as a player, Dave, how do you balance coming into a school that can maximize all those things, and what are you looking for in a school? Like, what does that look like to say, I want to get the most out of academia at first, but I want the ability to pivot? I guess the system is open for them to do that because there's very little restriction on them from transferring, from doing whatever.
Right.
But what are you looking for in a school? How can schools best serve athletes? And even if, whether we like it or not, forget you and I, whether we like it or not, what's the best way for a school to accommodate an athlete, maybe under any of those categories with the potential to switch categories? Because, Dave, it goes the other way. What if you come in as a high-flying recruit and you're looking to maximize your earning potential and go pro? You get an injury or two, or you find out you just can't run with the big dogs. You still want your education. Now you want to fall back here. But the team says, hey, we allotted this much to you. They give you the talk. I mean, how do players get accommodated in this system?
Yeah, well, the talk is obviously the huge thing that ultimately led to Salim Beasley's firing, really, right? Because obviously there's impropriety with the athletic director and everything like that. But really the reason that he was even so close to them is because they were under investigation, because they had girls on the team who they're basically like, you're medically retiring. And they're like, what?
Right.
And then a doctor is saying, oh, you have this injury. Like, I didn't even know I had an injury. Like, what? How is this? Right. So it's like even more than just the talk that like, hey, this might not be a good place for you. So I think the hardest part for me when we're talking about this is, at least in the past, the athletes could lean back on my scholarship is guaranteed for 4 years.
Right.
So if you were to pivot from, like, most guys, especially in football and basketball, every single one thinks they can go to the NFL or the NBA, or at least basketball, I can play overseas, as a pro for a couple of years. And that generally was true for most of them, especially in like the 90s and 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's not guaranteed for 4 years, then honestly, I don't really know how you approach it with your mindset. The one thing I would say is, like, the advice I was actually given to my mom, former Rutgers gymnast, who is applying to jobs now that all of us are getting older, and my younger brother's, the youngest adopted one's 11. Like, the advice I'm trying to give her in her job, which is also my sister who's applying to her first jobs, like, it's kind of interesting that we're doing this, but it's basically like, you can't worry about 2 years from now or swapping with someone at another physical location and swapping backups and what. Like, no, you got to be focused on, like, right now. And so if you're focused on right now, there's two parts of that. Does right now just mean focus on getting the money, or does right now mean focus on getting the best that you can from an academic standpoint? And ultimately, where this is going, and I'm sure of it, every day that passes, is we're ultimately going to end up in like a club sports model that most of the rest of the world has. And that's really, we'll talk about that at the end when we get to where this is really going. But from a pure individual perspective, I'll give an anecdote, right? So my wife played professional volleyball in France.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. She did not take advantage of the club environment that she had when she was in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
She just basically went to different high school every year. So kind of like these athletes are now, there was no rules. So she would go to whatever high school right now made the most sense with whatever club it is, and didn't learn that much in high school.
Right.
And so, and because, you're not going to complete the year, you're going to go to another school.
And that's how it is now, Dave. I mean,
Right.
basketball, it's like they're not even students. They're there for the season, which is like barely a semester and a half.
Right. So, but in her case, and perhaps this is where this might make sense, right? So that was her high school experience. Then she gets to the US, and it's not that way. So, like, she transferred she was an NIA player and then transferred to Division I, et cetera, et cetera. But then it was like a switch went off, and she was like, wait, they're giving me, I can take as many classes as I want. She's like, I don't even care if I fail, which I don't think she ever failed a class, but she would take like 7-8 classes a semester because she's like, I'm getting it for free. I'm on scholarship, right?
Right.
But how often does someone, now my father-in-law is a very smart, successful person in Brazil, right? Which is, so I think he was a good guide once she was willing to listen to him later on. But I'm not sure how many athletes will flip that switch, like you were saying. On the flip side, we have plenty of friends who, are like, we're professional volleyball or basketball players in Brazil who are like engineers, because ultimately they were like, hey, I'm on this club, but the club gives me access to all these things that I wouldn't have if I was just like in the street in a favela in Brazil, which is basically worse than any hood in the US, right? So they just kind of viewed it as like, this is my vehicle out of here. And I think that ultimately what would make sense is, if you're just going to pay and you're not really affiliated with the university, you're ultimately going to just end up with the players like already exist that go to class and then they go to their team activities or whatever. They watch the film, mandatory film. But like in the off season, especially, they're focused on their academics. And then you have another group who are like you're saying, they don't even go to class type of thing. I'm not saying this is a Rutgers specific thing. This is a nationwide problem, obviously. So I'm not sure how you do it other than identifying. And I think this is where football is a little easier, because the roster size is so big that you can have kind of people from the 3 different groups. Now, whereas if you're a basketball team, you can't afford to have like 5 of your 15 scholarship people who are like checked out and only care about basketball, because as we know, it carries over into other areas of your life. Like, I say this to people I interview all the time. Like, no one pays me $1 more in any of my businesses if my grass is cut at my house.
Right.
But if I am taking care of my house, then usually that will carry over into other aspects of my life. And it just so happens that the ones who are better students usually get better on the field, even if they're not in the facility 24/7. So I think that Rutgers has done a good job, as many other schools have. And you have the RWJ Barnabas Center. You give them all these opportunities. You give the career opportunities. And if you want to take it, you take it. And if you don't, well, we gave you this opportunity. Now, what's tough is like, do you cut this player? But I have a feeling that coaches aren't going to want to cut players who are good citizens, especially in a sport with a large roster size. But again, this is where basketball kind of gets in a tough area because you don't have room for that. Whereas like even in baseball, you got 25, 30 guys, gymnastics, you got 20 people, football, you got 100. Like, yeah, you can get by with a glue person who's a role player on your team. But in basketball, I don't know if Pikiell has that luxury to kind of keep his good citizens around. And he's like a good handshake guy, like you said. So I think it's going to be like we talked about the very first episode. Some universities are going to zig, some are going to zag. Some are basically going to say, you don't even have to come to class. If you want to, go ahead. If you want to have our career opportunities, you can. But ultimately, what I would try to do if I were a school would be sell those things. Sell the career services, even if they're not academically geared. Sell the classes to those who have a good support system and are interested in it. Some of it's as simple as like Ray Lewis. They sold his mom at, hey, your son's going to get 3 meals a day if he comes to Miami because they were so poor. And Bobby Bowden used to do that at Florida State as well. Like for some families, it's just the stability of that, right? So I think as a school, you got to just figure out like how willing are you to kind of like not necessarily cut bait, but like have very, very low requirements from an academic standpoint for some. But in the grander scheme, most of the kids are going to want to stay academically qualified, use it as a vehicle. And I think the number one positive about Schiano is when you're training people to become an adult, to be a productive member in society, they will pick up, they'll see the value in the academics, the career services, these other programs that you have. It's the selling part is getting them to buy into that. And I think that's where as a university, I would try to structure top down, president, athletic director, all these positions that Rutgers doesn't have filled to say, this is our vision for what our athletes need to do.
And in saying that, you mentioned before that some guys are about the team and other guys are, I think that there's a duality in that. If you're about the team and the on-field product, and you just said before, if you're going to work hard on the field, if you're going to work hard in the classroom, you're probably going to be that type of individual, work hard on the field. I think there's a symbiotic relationship between, if you want to maximize your earning potential and you want to make yourself an athletic brand and you want to ascend to the next level, you're going to work hard in the film room, which is then going to affect positively the team. And if you work hard in the classroom, you're going to have that overall work ethic, which is going to kind of feed into it. So you can have this symbiotic relationship where several different objectives are being met at once. And that brings me to another question, though. At present, you have a lot of pushback whenever, especially on the TKR board, there's a lot of pushback whenever I bring up the idea that, and I understand people will immediately pivot to collective bargaining, to antitrust law, and you can't do it, so forget it. And yeah, I get that. But assuming that there is some settlement or some congressional movement down the road that allows for a waiver, that allows for some sort of collective bargaining, that allows for some sort of contractual issue here between the schools and the athletes. At present, a lot of people and especially agents and attorneys, I think, no, we love the free-for-all. We want to leave when we want, earn what we want. We don't owe you anything. We don't have to tell you anything. We don't like we don't care about academics if we choose not to. We're leaving. We're hopping. You can't touch us at all. You don't have the right. It's antitrust. Get out of my face. All well and good. But you just brought up some interesting things. And we started that conversation talking about the talk or the fraud where it gets really bad with the phantom injuries or new injuries.
Right.
Down the road from the athlete's perspective, would it not benefit them as well once we get through this initial, hey, do whatever you want, earn whatever you want in the long run? Because remember, Dave, there's a lot of people that enter the portal that never find a home. Okay.
Right.
Or they find a home that's not what they wanted it to be. So it's not like this portal is a win for every athlete out there. The high profile guys, maybe not everybody. So would a system where there's more of a mutual contract and meeting of the minds between players and athletes and universities benefit both in the sense that you were just talking about, hey, we're going to make these academics available to you, these career opportunities available to you, and we want people that are going to buy into whatever our vision top down is for athletic programs, whether it's a mix, and it probably will be, of quasi-professionals who want to, hone their craft and go to the next level, and academic-oriented people. We have this general structure you could, take advantage of or not. But from the athlete standpoint, it's going to benefit you to concentrate somewhat on athletics because there's some contract that's going to keep you here for a while. So you're going to be working to, you and I both know, you transfer schools once in the middle of your education, you could bring a bunch of credits and you still have 2 more years to get a degree. You transfer 5 different times and you don't even finish a semester, you might not even get a degree. But on the converse of that, if you are all of a sudden a great student but not a great athlete, and you're eating up a scholarship spot, or you're on the hook for a bunch of NIL and you're not a great athlete, but you're a good student, good citizen, like you just said, now the team is presented with a conundrum. How do I deal with this person who's not producing as much on the floor in basketball, but they're a great citizen? There's a contract. Both sides have to adhere to it. And since we're talking about it from an athlete's perspective, is there any lane where the athletes would benefit from contracts and where that is a future that's viable in this system? I understand legalities and all that has to go through other channels, but is there a world where contracts are something that players might embrace too, as a way to feel more comfort and consistency in this relationship? Because I think it's going to be tough for schools to find philosophies and make commitments when kids are just all over the place and there's no rules of the road.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that was what we touched on in a previous conversation, was about when are we going to see multi-year contracts? And when we're talking about a contract, we're talking about a bilateral contract where both sides have an obligation to fill, that we can both agree to mutually part ways, which is the hard part of like the talk that you're saying, because that always existed in some form. But the other thing that I have to bring up that's really opening another can of worms was one of the conversations I was having with a couple of alums. They were all joking. A couple of guys who played baseball in Rutgers in the mid 80s, they were all waitlisted at Penn. And so they were talking about the price and whatever. And they're like, but they said I would be off the wait list if I gave them a nice check. And I was like, okay, I don't doubt that. It's not exactly how it was when at the time I was there. But now we've completely pivoted on its head, that like I came out of school with a lot of student loans. But Harvard, like right around when I was paying off my loans, Harvard's like, no more loans. And a lot of the other schools, whether it be Ivy League schools or other high achieving institutions like Big Ten schools, they don't want you to be in a huge amount of debt. Why? Because they want you to pay them and donate after you're out of there. So they're incentivized as well. The school's incentivized that. And then if you transfer 4 times and you graduate, you're not going to donate to 4 different schools.
No.
You're going to donate to one. The one
If
that you had
any.
the best experience that you, if any. Now, in the case of, for example, my wife, right, she was at the NAIA school, which no longer exists, so she doesn't donate to that. And then she was at 2 schools in Division I. And, if she was going to donate to one of them, she would. But then for grad school, she was at USF, and they come asking her for money at one point. And she's like, you didn't even admit me to the PhD or whatever program. Why do I have any reason that I don't like you? Like, why are you asking me for money? And they asked for like $20,000. Like, we don't have that much money, but like, I'm like, the nerve of these people, because if she was going to donate to any, it would not be USF, where she did not have a good experience as a coach, never mind as a player.
Right.
So it's like, I think what you're going to see is kind of like, you're going to see a couple things. One, I do think multi-year contracts that the school has to honor, that at least you can keep your degree, are important. Like, that has to come back, I think, because even these gymnasts who are not allowed to play, or the coach didn't want them to play, you have a choice. You can either go in the portal and play somewhere else if you think you're good enough, or we'll at least have to honor your scholarship, which I think many of them became student managers or whatever. If you're academically inclined, then that's fine. Now, you might have a bad taste in your mouth from the school trying to get, but that's this program, not, hey, I had a good experience in the history department of, and it's hard to get a degree as a historian, but whatever. I take that into another field, right? So I think multi-year contracts are going to be a good thing, because just like in the pros, you see like Jadeveon Clowney, he's always goes for a 1-year contract because he always thinks the next year he's going to get a big payday. He's always on 1-year contracts. Right. So your Lathan Somerville is always on a 1-year contract.
Yep.
But your guy who, I don't know, maybe a Caden Powers, he's not going to expect he's going to play this year. He doesn't want to have that where he's not going to play much. And then after 1 year, you're out of here. It's like, no, you got to at least give me 2 years, or Miles Johnson is an example, right? Like he was redshirting. So at least a 2-year contract would make some sense. And then at least gives you a little bit of stability that like, hey, at least I'm here for more time. Like, I don't know if it has to be 4 years, but I think the school gonna have to play a little bit of ball there. But ultimately, it's going to come down to the contract. I'm going to throw one last wrinkle at you, which is one of the things that I was with my best friend from high school. Him and his wife are teachers at Passaic County Tech institution, right? So tech schools have kind of gone by the wayside, but they basically have split their school into
That's
like
the
academy. Yeah, it's a high
I've been
school,
there. I've
right?
spoken there. I've spoken there in another capacity to students, so I know it.
Yeah, so like they've it's a big school.
Huge.
Right. So like, a lot of guys that we played against a couple guys, played professional, Hassim Bailey, Darrell Watkins before he went to Patterson Catholic, before Patterson Catholic closed their doors, like all kinds of crazy stuff. Right. But ultimately, they basically split it into two. The school is split between the academy, which is now like the magnet school, where you have your real high achievers. And then you still have your tech component where you don't take a full day of class, but you're a chef for half the day. And then you take a couple classes. And I think if I were a university, that's what I would try to do. I would say, hey, if you don't want to be, an engineer or a communications even major, tell us what you're interested in, fashion design, tech, whatever. And then your obligation as a student isn't necessarily to be reading 200-page books about the history of the Napoleonic Wars, but at least you have a skill. You leave here with a skill. And I feel like that would be some sort of middle ground that I could see universities taking this approach. Like, and I know, if Harvard's got remedial math now, I'm sure Rutgers can get by with, shifting maybe what their idea is of academic proficiency. But I think that that's really where I see this going. To wrap up my point is like bilateral contract that's for more than a year, they got to come at some point. Because if an agent and a player and the school all agree this is best for us, it makes sense to do that. And then on the flip side, being a little bit more flexible with what you're offering, or even say during the season, you don't even have to go to class or something. Maybe that's extreme, but like, I know that they kind of do the minimum a lot of times where they take 3 classes, their easiest classes, or maybe a writing seminar or something. And then you take 6 or 7 classes between summer and spring. Like that makes sense. So maybe you change modifying the season, especially for a sport like football where you got cross-country trips, blah, 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 blah. I think they're going to have to be a little bit more tailored to the individual sport and the individual student to set a program at the university level. And ultimately, I think that's where it's going to get decided because the NCAA has no clout. So I don't think there's going to be an overarching national policy. I think teams or individual universities are going to decide what works for them, and then other schools are going to copy it. That's where I think this is going.
I think it makes sense because if you have multi-year contracts and that way you have some ability to, you have some elasticity within the contract, i.e. like teachers might get paid for a year's salary, but the summer vacation is built in. And just like any employee, the paid time off is built into your contract. So you could structure classes, well, your season is this, so you're going to heavily load your academic side in the off season or whatever. There's playability there. Also, I think within the societal conversation of the changing role of universities, be it return on investment with certain degrees not earning as much as they thought compared to the cost of attaining the degree, whether it be what you were mentioning before regarding, what employers are looking for. I think there's long been a conversation, and we're headed that direction to some extent, about more vocational, they used to call it, or tech type education.
Vocational education,
yeah. Even when it's only 2 years, and some of these grand universities, I understand that their initial, and Rutgers a little bit bigger, so there's professional schools, there's nursing programs, there's all different things in a Rutgers as opposed to an Ivy League institution. But I understand their initial academic purpose was this, general education, higher learning type thing, a lot of consumption of literature. You have electives, you have required courses and a bunch of different subjects. And there might have to be some elasticity within that too, to like change the way you achieve certain educations. But these universities might have to participate in this tech vocational type skills training as well. And that could be a way to fit into a smaller contract for a smaller number of years, et cetera,
Right,
and
right.
work. So it makes sense what you're saying. I could see it. I think the legalities and the lawsuits and the
It's gonna be
congressional stuff,
crazy.
that's all got to happen, and we got to figure that out. But the last thing I want you to just talk about briefly before we wrap up here is, assuming we're just in the current state of affairs. And I understand the caveat that I brought up early in the show, which is, you're kind of just getting paid to play. You're not really getting necessarily a sponsorship deal with a company or whatever. But maybe a school could offer that. Assuming our current environment, what can schools be doing to best foster students from their perspective in this NIL era where your primary focus is not just education, but you still got to go to class right now to some extent. You still got to be working while you're there, even if it's for just a semester or less, some way, somewhat academically, but you're also worried about money. You also may have a sponsorship deal or a speaking engagement of some sort, depending how it works. You're also expected to travel these great distances. What can schools do for students from their perspective to best accommodate this new era of college sports just right now, assuming all of our ideas and things have not yet come to fruition, because they haven't yet?
Yeah, I would say the best thing you can do is help equip the students with skills that they'll get paid for in the marketplace. The same thing I would say to anyone, whether they're an athlete or not, right? Give yourself skills that people are willing to pay for.
Mm-hmm.
So as a university, you need to foster your students to develop skills that other people are willing to pay for. And then that would pay for itself, because then they had a good experience and they give you donations, whatever. They're a good ambassador for the school. That's what I would say. And so you can be creative with how you do it. And I would say there's probably not too much legality with something like, let's say Tyrone Powell and Robert Longerbeam had the Ream and Beam podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether you structure that as NIL money, or whether you can somehow finagle that's their like work study job for anyone, if that's even, I don't know how, but I would try, if I was, especially in basketball when you don't have a lot of guys, I would try to come up with as many different ways to have these earning opportunities for my players. Now, podcast is a good example because I think that was a success. I think it put their face out there. I think it was probably good for the NFL. I know Powell didn't get drafted, but I definitely think it helped Longerbeam, because there's NFL has tape of his college on the field. They had his interviews, and then they see that, like, this is a guy who had to prepare for these. This is a guy who his face was out there publicly. He didn't deface Rutgers, so as an NFL team, he's not going to deface us, like, probably. So I think that and this is where I think career services is the biggest selling point. Like, the biggest selling point for going to Penn in my case was that career services, Ivy League schools at that time were so much more developed than anywhere else.
Yes.
Like, I got interview practice, I got internships anywhere in the world that I had access to, and I got graduates all over who are willing to talk to me and say, hey, if you do this, 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 and this, we'll hire you. And I think you have to gear it there, because the biggest thing that students don't know is they don't know what jobs exist. So if you can educate them early and then figure out, like, you don't have to stay in this job forever, but if you can perform at some job, unless the student is in like a heavy chemistry program and it's like there's a path to a job right after that. But to your point, if you're a psychology undergrad, there's only so many psychology, now that you got better help or whatever, there might be more opportunities. But I would say you probably have to make sure your athletes have some career plan. Now, whether they change it or not, whatever. But that's where I would focus the majority of my effort, because I think everything ties into that. And ultimately, they'll respect you as an institution for setting them up for success by pushing that on that mindset and getting paid for it. If somebody, like, let's say cutting hair, if Rutgers isn't a school that has, I don't think, styling or cosmetology, I'm not sure, I don't think. But, like, if someone wants to cut hair and they're a, women's basketball player, let them do that as they're, like, even if they have to take classes, like you're saying, you're not removing that entirely. But hey, you're there for a year. A program at, the local hairstyling school in Charlotte is a year long. There's no reason that you couldn't be a little bit more flexible with that and kind of do what companies did before public education was as available, and they have schools their workers' kids go to the school and they're grooming those kids to work at the Ford plant in 1896 or whatever. Like, I feel like you can take some nuggets of that, and that's what my advice to the schools would be flexible. Don't totally change everything, but try to come up with a individualized learning plan, or what you say in the education in New Jersey, IEP, individualized education plan. You're kind of doing an individualized career plan for every single athlete, which I think they already do in a lot of these sports because it exists. They have academic advisors, they have team advisors. So that already exists, but I would just sink into that even more than I already have been, because that's the only way to show value, get them sticky. The kids want to stay, the coaches want them to stay, etc.
Yeah, and it ties in the NIL, even if it's nominal and they would have gotten it anyway. At least there's some assignment of funds to a project, and you can now justify it on the back end. Plus, they're learning a skill. They have an actual job. There's some NIL involved in what they're doing actually, but they're also getting some sort of education. And if schools do it well, perhaps that's another incentive for an athlete to attend that school. But guys, this was our episode on part 2 of Embracing the Future of College Athletics. This was much more from a student athlete based perspective. A lot of things that we're talking about because the system is in flux and it's in rapid flux. And so things are changing so quickly and it's hard for us to even get a grasp on. It's like a running water in front of us we can't grab onto, and it's accelerating quicker and quicker. But hopefully we gave you some things to ponder and stimulated you intellectually a little bit. We will be back with part 2 of The Ceiling for Greg Schiano and the football program. And then we will have another part on embracing the future of college athletics down the road. So as always, click subscribe to support us and continue to tune in. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, you can get this as an audio podcast on any major podcasting platform. And if you're listening on audio, you can watch us on YouTube at Night Watch Larry K. Just search it on Google. Dave, tell the people where they can find you, what you got going on upcoming.
Well, right now in Off Tackle Empire, we did some schedule reviews for football last week, where Rutgers was voted by the group as the second toughest schedule in the Big Ten next year. So we had one. I was a contributor to that article. But mostly I've got real estate closings in the next couple of weeks. As I said to some people, who I met over the weekend, hey, if you're interested in moving to the Carolinas or Florida, find me, hit me up, and we'll see what we could do. If it's not a market I'm familiar with, I'll help you find an agent in that vicinity that would work for you. So that's really the main thing that I've got going on outside of helping you and enjoying spending time with you with this conversation on this podcast. And I'll have an upcoming appearance on Aaron's podcast to talk specifically about the aftermath and where does Rutgers go from here after the spring football game. The Scarlet Faithful, that is. The
Scarlet Faithful. Make sure you turn in there. Great stuff from Aaron. I've been listening regularly. I will have some videos on you on my take on the latest gets on the transfer portal and roster building with the football program. So stay tuned for that. And I'll also obviously be touching base on some football related predictions and analysis as we head into the season with David Anderson. So keep it locked here for Night Watch, to Night Watch for all Scarlet Knights news and conversation, and keep it locked to all the other creators as well. We have quite the community humming right along for all of you who bleed Scarlet. So we will talk soon. And until then, Larry K and David Anderson are out.